Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to see about the major wars of Indian Army, which will help you in SSB interview and to develop your defense knowledge. Let's get into the video. Firstly, Indo-Pakistani War of 1947 to 1948. The First Kashmir War was a war fought between India and Pakistan over the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. It was the first of four Indo-Pakistani wars between the two newly independent nations. Pakistan precipitated the war a few weeks after its independence by launching tribal Lashkar militias from Waziristan in an effort to capture Kashmir and to preempt the possibility of its ruler joining India. The inconclusive result of the war still affects the geopolitics of both countries. Hari Singh, the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir, was facing an uprising by his Muslim subjects in Poonch and lost control of the western districts of his kingdom. On the 22nd of October 1947, Pakistan's Pashtun tribal militias crossed the border of the state. These local tribal militias and irregular Pakistani forces moved to take the capital city of Srinagar, but upon reaching Baramulla, they took to plunder and stalled. Maharaja Hari Singh made a plea to India for assistance, and help was offered, but it was subject to his signing of an instrument of accession to India. The war was initially fought by the Jammu and Kashmir state forces and by militias from the frontier tribal areas adjoining the Northwest Frontier Province. Following the accession of the state to India on the 26th of October 1947, Indian troops were airlifted to Srinagar, the state capital. British commanding officers initially refused the entry of Pakistani troops into the conflict, citing the accession of the state to India. However, later in 1948, they relented and Pakistan's armies entered the war shortly afterwards. The front solidified gradually along what later came to be known as the Line of Control. A formal ceasefire was declared effective the 1st of January 1949. Sino-Indian War. The Sino-Indian War, also known as Indochina War of 1962 or Sino-Indian War of 1962, took place between China and India from October to November 1962 as a major flare-up of the Sino-Indian border dispute. There had been a series of violent border skirmishes between the two countries after the 1959 Tibetan uprising, when India granted asylum to the Dalai Lama. Chinese military action grew increasingly aggressive after India rejected proposed Chinese diplomatic settlements throughout 1960-1962, with China recommencing previously banned forward patrols in Ladakh after the 30th of April 1962. Amidst the Cuban Missile Crisis, China abandoned all attempts towards a peaceful resolution on the 20th of October 1962, invading disputed territory along the 3,225-kilometer (2,004 miles) border in Ladakh and across the McMahon Line in the northeastern frontier. Citation needed. Chinese troops pushed back Indian forces in both theaters, capturing all of their claimed territory in the Western Theater and the Tawang Tract in the Eastern Theater. The conflict ended when China unilaterally declared a ceasefire on the 20th of November 1962 and simultaneously announced its withdrawal to pre-war position, also known as the Line of Actual Control.
Did you make any attempt at a conditional surrender?
No, sir. The question is either we live or we die.
Your Air Force has been destroyed. If you don't surrender, you will be killed unmercifully.
Indo-Pakistani War of 1971. The Indo-Pakistani War of 1971 was a military confrontation between India and Pakistan that occurred during the Bangladesh Liberation War in East Pakistan from the 3rd of December 1971 until the Pakistani capitulation in Dhaka on the 16th of December 1971. The war began with Pakistan's Operation Chengiz Khan, consisting of preemptive aerial strikes on 11 Indian air stations. The strikes led to India declaring war on Pakistan, marking their entry into the war for East Pakistan's independence, on the side of Bengali nationalist forces. India's entry expanded the existing conflict, with Indian and Pakistani forces engaging on both the eastern and western fronts. 13 days after the war started, India achieved a clear upper hand, and the Eastern Command of the Pakistan military signed the Instrument of Surrender on the 16th of December 1971 in Dhaka, marking the formation of East Pakistan as the new nation of Bangladesh. Approximately 93,000 Pakistani servicemen were taken prisoner by the Indian Army, which included 79,676 to 81,000 uniformed personnel of the Pakistan Armed Forces, including some Bengali soldiers who had remained loyal to Pakistan. The remaining 10,324 to 12,500 prisoners were civilians, either family members of the military personnel or collaborators Razakars. Siachen conflict. The Siachen conflict, sometimes referred to as the Siachen Glacier conflict or the Siachen War, was a military conflict between India and Pakistan over the disputed 1,000 square mile (2,600 square kilometers) Siachen Glacier region in Kashmir. The conflict was started in 1984 by India's successful capture of the Siachen Glacier as part of Operation Meghdoot and continued with Operation Rajiv in 1987. India took control of the 70-kilometer-long 43 miles Siachen Glacier and its tributary glaciers, as well as all the main passes and heights of the Saltoro Ridge immediately west of the glacier, including Siala, Bilifondla, and Gyomla. Pakistan controls the glacial valleys immediately west of the Saltoro Ridge. A ceasefire went into effect in 2003, but both sides maintain a heavy military presence in the area. The conflict has resulted in thousands of deaths, mostly due to natural hazards. External commentators have characterized it as pointless, given the perceived uselessness of the territory, and indicative of bitter stubbornness on both sides.
Our radio said, and one of the Pakistani soldiers or officer, whoever it was, he said me, my code name was Shersha. Oh Shersha, you have come. Don't try to come up, otherwise you'll have a tough time. Companies success can lose. Ye dil mange more.
Kargil War. The Kargil War, also known as the Kargil conflict, was fought between India and Pakistan from May to July 1999 in the Kargil district of Jammu and Kashmir and elsewhere along the line of control Ladakh. In India, the conflict is also referred to as Operation Vijay, which was the codename of the Indian military operation in the region. The Indian Air Force acted jointly with the Indian Army to flush out the Pakistan Army and paramilitary troops from vacated Indian positions along the Ladakh 20 in what was designated as Operation Safed Sagar. The conflict was triggered by the infiltration of Pakistani troops disguised as Kashmiri militants into strategic positions on the Indian side of the Ladakh, which serves as the de facto border between the two countries in the disputed region of Kashmir. During its initial stages, Pakistan blamed the fighting entirely on independent Kashmiri insurgents, but documents left behind by casualties and later statements by Pakistan's Prime Minister and Chief of Army Staff showed the involvement of Pakistani paramilitary forces, led by General Ashraf Rashid. The Indian Army, later supported by the Indian Air Force, recaptured a majority of the positions on the Indian side of the Ladakh. Facing international diplomatic opposition, Pakistani forces withdrew from all remaining Indian positions along the Ladakh.
See that? Now!
Just catch you. Yeah, आपके लिए.
2016 Uri attack. At around 5:30 am on the 18th of September, 4 insurgents attacked an Indian Army brigade headquarters in Uri, near the line of control in a pre-dawn ambush. They were said to have lobbed 17 grenades in 3 minutes. As a rear administrative base camp with tents caught fire, 17 army personnel were killed during the attack. An additional 19 to 30 soldiers were reported to have been injured. A gun battle ensued lasting 6 hours, during which all the 4 individuals were killed. Combing operations continued to flush out additional terrorists thought to be alive. On the 19th of September, Home Minister Rajnath Singh, Defence Minister Manohar Parrikar, Chief of the Army Staff Dalbir Singh, National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and other officials of the Home and Defence Ministries met to review the security situation in Kashmir, particularly in areas along the line of control. The National Investigation Agency filed a first information report regarding the attack and took over the investigation from Jammu and Kashmir Police on the 20th of September. Indian officials said the strike targeted areas close to the line of control, Ladakh, where it believes militants congregate for their final briefings before sneaking across the Ladakh. An Indian security source said the operation began with Indian forces firing artillery across the frontier to provide cover for 3 to 4 teams of 70 to 80 soldiers from the 4th and 9th battalions of the Para Special Forces to cross the Ladakh at several separate points shortly after midnight IST on the 29th of September 18:30 hours UTC, the 28th of September. Teams from 4 Para crossed the Ladakh in the Nogam sector of Kupwara district, while teams from 9 Para simultaneously crossed the Ladakh in Poonch district, by 2 am. IST, according to army sources, the special forces teams had traveled 1 to 3 km on foot and had begun destroying terrorist bases with handheld grenades and 84mm rocket launchers. The teams then swiftly returned to the Indian side of the line of control, suffering only one injury, a soldier wounded after tripping a landmine. The Indian Army said the strike was a preemptive attack on militant bases, claiming that it had received intelligence that the militants were planning terrorist strikes against India. India said that, in destroying terrorist infrastructure, it also attacked those who were trying to support them, indicating it attacked Pakistani soldiers too. India later briefed opposition parties and foreign envoys, but did not disclose operational details. Some Indian media claimed that the Indian Army infiltrated 2 to 3 km into Pakistani territory, but the Indian Army did not say whether its troops crossed the border or had simply fired across it. India said that none of its soldiers were killed, though 2 soldiers were injured. It also stated that one of its soldiers, from 37 Rashtriya Rifles, was captured by Pakistan after he inadvertently crossed over to the Pakistan side, though not during the surgical strikes. Initially, Indian media claimed that the army used helicopters during the skirmish. On the 30th of September, an Indian minister denied that there were any helicopters used, stating the operation was conducted on the ground. In 2018, the Indian government released an alleged footage of the strike. Indo-Pakistani War of 1965. The Indo-Pakistani War of 1965, or the Second Kashmir War, was a culmination of skirmishes that took place between April 1965 and September 1965 between Pakistan and India. The conflict began following Pakistan's Operation Gibraltar, which was designed to infiltrate forces into Jammu and Kashmir to precipitate an insurgency against Indian rule. It became the immediate cause of the war. The 17-day war caused thousands of casualties on both sides and witnessed the largest engagement of armored vehicles and the largest tank battle since World War II. Hostilities between the two countries ended after a ceasefire was declared through UNSC Resolution 211 following a diplomatic intervention by the Soviet Union and the United States, and the subsequent issuance of the Tashkent Declaration. Much of the war was fought by the country's land forces in Kashmir and along the border between India and Pakistan. This war saw the largest amassing of troops in Kashmir since the partition of India in 1947, a number that was overshadowed only during the 2001–2002 military standoff between India and Pakistan. Most of the battles were fought by opposing infantry and armored units, with substantial backing from air forces and naval operations. India had the upper hand over Pakistan when the ceasefire was declared. Although the two countries fought to a standoff, the conflict is seen as a strategic and political defeat for Pakistan, as it had neither succeeded in fomenting insurrection in Kashmir nor had it been able to gain meaningful support at an international level. However, in terms of air superiority, the PUF managed an upper hand over the combat zones despite being numerically inferior. Internationally, the war was viewed in the context of the Greater Cold War and resulted in a significant geopolitical shift in the subcontinent. Before the war, the United States and the United Kingdom had been major material allies of both India and Pakistan as their primary suppliers of military hardware and foreign developmental aid. During and after the conflict, both India and Pakistan felt betrayed by the perceived lack of support by the Western powers for their respective positions. Those feelings of betrayal were increased with the imposition of an American and British embargo on military aid to the opposing sides. As a consequence, India and Pakistan openly developed closer relationships with the Soviet Union and China, respectively. Beginning on the 5th of May 2020, Chinese and Indian troops engaged in aggressive melee, face-offs, and skirmishes at locations along the Sino-Indian border, including near the disputed Pangong Lake in Ladakh and the Tibet Autonomous Region, and near the border between Sikkim and the Tibet Autonomous Region. Additional clashes also took place at locations in eastern Ladakh along the line of actual control, LAC. In late May, Chinese forces objected to Indian road construction in the Galwan River Valley. According to Indian sources, melee fighting on the 15th to the 16th of June 2020 resulted in the deaths of Chinese and Indian soldiers. Media reports stated that soldiers were taken captive on both sides and released in the coming few days, while official sources on both sides went on to deny this. On the 7th of September, for the first time in 45 years, shots were fired along the LAC, with both sides blaming each other for the firing. Indian media also reported that Indian troops fired warning shots at the PLA on the 30th of August. China has also extensively developed its infrastructure in these disputed border regions and is continuing to do so. The revocation of the special status of Jammu and Kashmir in August 2019 by the Indian government has also troubled China. However, India and China have both maintained that there are enough bilateral mechanisms to resolve the situation. This includes multiple rounds of colonel, brigadier, and major general rank dialogue, special representatives meetings, meetings of the Working Mechanism for Consultation and Coordination on China-India Border Affairs, and meetings and communication between their respective foreign and defense ministers. On the 12th of January 2022, the 14th Corps Commander level meeting at Chushul-Moldo Border Personnel Meeting (BPM) point took place. Following the Galwan Valley skirmish on the 15th of June, some Indian campaigns about boycotting Chinese products was started. Action on the economic front included cancellation and additional scrutiny of certain contracts with Chinese firms, and calls were also made to stop the entry of Chinese companies into strategic markets in India. By November 2020, the Indian government had banned over 200 Chinese apps, including apps owned by Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, Sina, and ByteDance. Indian sources reported the deaths of 20 Indian soldiers and casualties of at least 45 Chinese soldiers. China reported 4 deaths. On the 7th of September, for the first time in 45 years, shots were fired along the Lak, with both sides blaming each other for the firing. India's foreign policy is based on the principles of non-alignment, peaceful coexistence, and mutual respect. India's foreign policy seeks to promote the country's national interests while maintaining friendly relations with other countries. That's the end of the video. Comment below your doubts. Thanks for watching. Give a like for the video if you like it.